Hey everybody, this is Kevin Purcell with the Theotek podcast, and this week we're going to hopefully be talking a little bit about making church presentations better, as well as ProPresenter 6. We're still waiting on our guest Paul Allen Clifford, and if you'll remember him, he joined us a few weeks ago to sort of demonstrate what ProPresenter can do. We also are on the heels of what's called Google I/O, a Google Developer Conference. And there's one or two of the features there that might have an interesting impact on those of us in church life and in Bible and church technology. And anyway, we're just going to chat about these kinds of things. And I see that Paul just joined us here. I got us all going a little bit late, but thank you for being with us again this week, Paul. I think you might be muted there. But anyway, let's start off with, yesterday was Google I/O, the Google Developers Conference, which was pretty interesting. And one of the new features that I found interesting was a thing called Google on Tap. And Antoine, you seem to know a little bit about that. What is Google on Tap, and just explain the feature to us and what it might mean.
So it's this idea that in you already have Google now that's able to present to you a little bit of contextual information. Google Now on Tap, or Now on Tap, takes that and not just gives you contextual information about the things Google knows about maybe where you parked your car, or where you might be going in the next minute, next few hours or so, but it extends that even into the applications that you're dealing with, so that you're now getting kind of a Google search inside of your applications themselves. So you could be listening to some music, and instead of saying, Google, what is the person that's playing such and such, you'd now get, hey Google, you can just say, oh, what am I listening to right now, or what's his first name, or what's his last name, or things like that. So you kind of get a really responsive, I want to say almost HAL or computer from Star Trek: The Next Generation kind of contextual response engine inside and above some of your applications that you're working with. So it's one part on the device and another part just leveraging whatever applications that you have. It almost personalizes Google Now for you.
Yeah, and the thing I thought about was as I was listening to it, the Google I/O keynote, hearing them describe this and talk about it, my thought was, I wonder what that would do for, say, a Bible app, since it's contextual and it knows that you're in, let's say, Accordance, breaks the time warp continuum and comes out with an Android version of Accordance Bible software. I'm saying that because if you don't know, Rick Mansfield there works with Accordance, and but let's say they have their brand new Android version, and someone has a phone that has Google Now on Tap enabled on it. That'll probably be very precious few early on. The service, you could hold down the home key, and it would allow it to search the app itself. And I know Bible apps are sort of designed as search apps in general. I was just trying to wonder, is there some way that maybe you could utilize this to get better search results?
Well, you can. Yeah, you can. It's really neat, Kev. So think of it like, we've demoed many times, being inside of a Bible app, and, you want to search on a word, you search on a phrase, you search on a topic or a subject, and really that search inside of the Bible app only searches for the materials that Bible app offers, maybe that you've downloaded, and you may get a few additional references for books or services that particular Bible app or service offers. Now on Tap says, yeah, you have your app and the content in your app, but Google's going to actively go out and it's going to hit the Amazons, it's going to hit the Logos libraries, it's going to hit anything that Google's search bot can go touch to answer your question as to what you're looking for. Now on Tap is going to go out for. So it's going to make it, in some respects, it's going to make it a harder market, for some Bible makers to be able to say, you have to go and buy, these additional materials for us to search you. Or they're going to, have to work out some deal with publishers to not make certain pieces of content available or searchable via Now on Tap. So it's a plus and a minus. You know, for those who've been in their Bible app a very long time and have a whole lot of content, you may not see a lot of benefit from it. But if you're just starting your collection of content and resources, to be able to say now on tap, you know, what else does this mean? It's already searched everything you own, and now it's going to go out and search a few things that you don't own that are searchable, that are, you know, out there. It'll hopefully add some value to those folks that are building assistant materials for their Bibles.
I wonder though, you know, how that I could see it doing for basic English content search, but when you're getting into Greek or Hebrew or Syriac or, you know, some of these, I think that would become more complex. And also, like, you know, like in the Accordance app, you can search for specific fields.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want to just search for entries in a dictionary versus searching in the content, which might bring back a lot more, a greater number of hits. You know, you could the beauty of Bible software over, like, say, a Kindle title or something like that, is that you can very narrowly specify the kind of content that you're looking for. And I'd be surprised if this service would be that sophisticated, because different apps are going to handle content differently like that.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Rick. I think it might, for very narrow kinds of searches like that, it might not work. But, you know, I pulled up the ESV Bible app. We talked about this a few weeks ago. And I sort of said, you know, I don't know if this is going to be all that useful to someone like me, because what is it? It's basically an ESV Bible book reader. But with Google Now on tap, suddenly the ESV Bible app might become a little bit more interesting and powerful, just because you know, I could search for an idea in that would then open up the entire internet and give me content from lots of places instead of just this one local app. Or say the YouVersion Bible app, which is really pretty much a book reader, but suddenly the users of arguably, well, not arguably, it is the most downloaded Bible app on any platform. It suddenly becomes a little bit more useful for something like this. Antoine, you had something else you wanted to?
Yeah. Well, to that point right there, you guys were making there, it's the other thing that Google talked about, you know, that feeds into the Now on Tap. They're doing an incredible amount of work with machine-based translation, machine synthesis, and artificial intelligence. Essentially, Google is kind of a mini IBM. They're really making the back end of their search engine something that thinks, if that makes some sense to you guys. Something that does more thinking than it does just giving you results. So, you know, first search engine was just about giving you results really fast. Now it's about actually trying to interpret what you really want. And part of the technology behind On Tap is this contextual engine that tries to infer what is it that you mean that you're looking for, and do so whether you're looking at context, text, or even multiple languages. So during I/O, they talked about supporting trade languages just right off bat, you know, for natural language processing. It is not hard to think that they probably have Greek in there. There's a good chance that, you know, they might have a little bit of Latin in there. It's not a lot of bit of Latin. You know, some of the other sources they're probably working on, and those will come in time. But that natural language processing piece of their DeepMind engine, it's scary and impressive all at the same time. I mean, they're essentially turning all these threads of information they have into a knowledge engine, a response engine. And so it allows you to say, hey, listen, I'm just looking for this piece of text, or I just need a translation of this, or translate this, or give me all of the pieces in the Bible software I have that correspond to that, and infer meaning, not just give you back what it is you're looking for. It's cool and it's scary all at the same time.
Well, I think the last point that we should make about this, or that I'd like to make about this, is it sounds to me like one thing I wasn't entirely clear on. Maybe Antoine, you can clear this up. Is this going to be an Android M feature, or is this going to be a Google Now feature? So, for example, if I have Google Now on any device, will Google Now get updated in my Android 5.0.1 device, or my Android 4. Whatever device, or is it only coming to Google M whatever they're going to call it, Milky Way or whatever their choice is. In other words, will there be anybody, except for the very narrow few people who own a Nexus 6, will they be able to use it this year at any time when it comes out in the fall?
No, initially it's going to be Android M supported. It's a server. The back end is the server side, so they're initially doing Android M, but at least right now, if it's going to go back as far as 4.4, that could change.
Okay, so at some point 4.4 users might get this, but not likely to happen this year. It's probably more likely.
And that's what Google tends to do with most of its services, and it's a smart strategy to start out very narrow, and they can kind of begin to test the field, and then they branch out to others as they go. Maybe
smart, but also frustrating for Android users. Sure. We sort of look over at the Apple side, and it's like as soon as Apple comes out with someone, everyone gets it.
Yeah.
Now, sure, the first day their servers crash when you're trying to download the latest iOS or Mac OS 10 update, but within a few days, everybody's got who wants it has got it. So that's kind of frustrating. Well, let's move on to talking with our guest. Paul, we're really glad that you did join us today. If you don't remember, Paul was with us a few weeks ago talking about ProPresenter, which is a very powerful worship presentation software program. It can do, well, tell us, what does ProPresenter do, Paul, before we get into what we really brought you in for?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Great. I just added a new mixer to my system, and this is the first Hangout it's being used in, so I just wanted to make sure that was okay. Yeah, ProPresenter is worship software. Now, there are a lot of churches that kind of make do with PowerPoint, and they think, well, we don't need worship software, and I was the same way back in the day until I started using it, and worship software makes it easy. It makes it easy when the minister of music or worship leader either forgets or is led by the Spirit. I don't care which it is, it doesn't matter, the result's the same, and they skip a verse, or they go back over the course one more time. Whatever they do, it makes it easy to fix that on the fly so that everyone doesn't look back at the tech booth like, oh, you made a mistake because those words are different from what that person is singing. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. It also makes it really easy to add songs in on the fly, add in sermon and Bible notes, things like that, so that you have support for what's going on in the service. Basically, it just makes the projector much more useful.
All right, cool. One interesting thing is that ProPresenter just came out with a brand new version for Mac, version 6, and I don't think that we want to make this a ProPresenter podcast as much as it is just a church presentation podcast, but maybe there's 2 or 3 features that you find to be just really cool that viewers interested in church presentation might enjoy or find, hey, wow, that's cool, I wish I had that in mine, or something like that. Anything you can think of?
Yeah, a couple of things that are huge in my opinion. One is that you can have on your internal network, even if it's just, you've got a Wi-Fi router in your church, you can set up a page where people, like in the children's ministry, can go to this page and they can type in, say, a number of a child who's having a really hard time and the parents need to come rescue them or rescue the nursery worker, as the case may be. You can have the children's ministry people do that, and then there's a notification that will show up on the presentation computer, but it won't show up on the main screen until the operator clicks the button for it to show up. So instead of getting a text message and typing in the number, or getting a note from the children's ministry worker and typing that in, you get that number automatically. It shows up as a notification on your computer, and then when the prayer is over, you just click it and it shows up, pre-formatted, ready to go. The element transitions is a great thing as well. I see. I think that's actually going on right now on the screen. But element transitions allows you to transition between different pieces. And the way they're doing it, it looks a little bit more like Keynote, which, in my opinion, is a little bit better designed than PowerPoint.
I agree.
So, in a way, it's catching up, but it's just really beautiful in how it's working.
Is that what I'm looking at now? Because I'm totally clueless. I downloaded this trial this week, and this is the very first time I've even opened it. Is that what I'm looking at? The transitions?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So this does look a lot like Power or Keynote rather, in the way it handles it.
Yeah. So you have the background show up, and then Theotek podcast shows up, and then a secondary title shows up, and then later on maybe those two go away and a big graphic shows up, all on that same slide. So that's really great for announcement slides, like if you have a pre-service announcement loop, or even if it's during the announcement time, you could use those. Also, something that they haven't demonstrated, but I think might be useful, is in a more traditional church, we'd call it special music or the anthem. At my church, we call it a perform song, and that's a song where you don't intend the congregation to join in on the singing, but maybe you want some lyrics to show up at certain times and really reinforce so that people get what is being sung. You can do that in the element transition and really do some cool things with the lyrics that previously you had to create little videos to make that happen.
All right, cool. Anything else on the ProPresenter side?
Yeah, there.
Well, I have a question once you go ahead, though.
Oh yeah. There's timers that start things automatically. That's a little catch up with some of the other presentation software. There's what they call the Telestrator, so the pastor can draw on the screen, so underline text. If there's a Bible map up, use what looks like a laser pointer, only it shows up directly on the screen.
How's that work? Where do I find that on here? The Telestrator thing. I didn't even think about it for something like that. Is that what I'm doing now? Or is this a shape drawing or something?
Well, you can draw shapes with it. Well, I'm not actually seeing your screen right now. I don't know if that's on my end, but it's certainly the case that you can. There's part of the tool where you can draw like a circle to highlight things, so it darkens everything outside of the circle. So if you had, again, a Bible map and you wanted to draw a circle around Laodicea and then everything else gets dark, you could do that. You could also use the laser pointer feature. It's got various tools inside of the Telestrator, and you can swap between those.
Okay. Well, I think most people know what a Telestrator is, so we don't have to belabor that. But well, let's get on. I actually invited.
Can I ask a question real quick about ProPresenter 6? Kevin, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Paul, we use ProPresenter at our church, so I have to make sure that our worship minister sees this. And I always say that I want to learn how to use it, and I haven't yet. But let me ask a question that I ask kind of every time a new version comes out. Is this good for? Is something like ProPresenter good for, say, the classroom? You know, my situation last night, I was teaching a college level New Testament survey class, and I go back and forth between Keynote and Accordance. And you know, what I generally do is, I teach from a presenter screen in Keynote that has, I can see the slide, and the next slide, and I can see my notes, that I have for that slide. So I'm primarily working from those notes. But then, I have to hop out to go to Accordance to do anything that interacts directly with the Bible unless I've prepared something ahead of time. Is something like ProPresenter, has it gotten to the point that it's good beyond the worship service? Is it good for the classroom yet, or should I just still stick with Keynote for right now?
Well, I think it's great for the classroom. Anytime I do public speaking, I try and use ProPresenter just because I love it. I think it's remarkably more useful. There are people that really like to see exactly what's on the main screen, and that's all they want to see. I'm not that kind of person. I'm an operator, so I like seeing the controller screen, and I think I can set up a more quickly than I can anything else. One feature in, I think it goes all the way back to ProPresenter 3, maybe before. 3 is where I picked it up, is that you can have a text document and you can import that text document and it automatically will generate slides based on where the carriage returns are. So each paragraph becomes a new slide, and there's no formatting, there's no anything that you have to do. Maybe you want to, and then you can go from there. I will say, have any interaction with Accordance, but they have rebuilt the Bible, the Bible feature in it. So it could be that that has more that that would be helpful to you personally,
Sure.
But I really don't actually know how your class works and how you use it.
Yeah. Maybe I just need to download the demo and play around.
Yep, absolutely. It's one other thing that I love about ProPresenter is that its demo is clear except it has watermark. So you could use it in your preparation, you can use it for everything, but when you go to actually present it, you'd have a big ProPresenter logo in the middle of your screen. So
Yeah.
that's how they get you to actually buy the full software.
Thanks.
No problem.
Well, cool, Paul. Thank you for that. And the more I see it, the more I'm impressed with it. I just, again, it's hard to justify us buying it when we've already got something fairly powerful in Media Shout. It's just that every week when I make our presentations on Media Shout, I find that the stability of it seems to go down. It's like nothing changed, but it's less stable this week than it was last week. I think maybe updates to Windows might be breaking things or something. I'm not sure, so it might be hard to blame Media Shout for that. But would you say that ProPresenter is pretty stable?
I would.
Is it Mac only?
Well, ProPresenter in general is both Mac and PC. I always tell people you won't regret buying a Mac and using ProPresenter with it. The PC version is absolutely wonderful, but the Mac version is a delight. It makes you thank God that people have invented computers. It's just awesome. It makes you happy to use. The PC version is fine, but there's two reasons for that. First off, Renewed Vision has been making the Mac version for like 10 years, so they're really good at writing Mac code. The PC version they've been making about 5 or 6 years, so they're getting there. The other reason is that OS 10 includes some things that make it easier. There's core video, core animation, things like that that are built into the operating system that they can just call as opposed to writing from scratch. So,
Hey, Paul.
ProPresenter isn't quite available on the Windows side yet, but I anticipate that to come anytime now.
You said ProPresenter 6. is not available on Windows side, right?
Right. ProPresenter 5 is, and they've said that if you buy ProPresenter 5, you get a free update to ProPresenter 6.
Okay.
So,
Antoine.
Yeah, I'm a weird nugger, and I think this is going to end up going into our talk a little bit. I'm a mobile first guy, so using a laptop or any desktop OS to create my decks usually don't happen as often. But do you find, with ProPresenter, that folks are making better presentations because of ProPresenter's tools? Does it just end up making something a little bit more polished, probably in comparison to some of the other tools that are out there, or just the way it's designed, that it just kind of wraps your mind around doing worship-oriented presentations better?
I think there's 2 reasons that's absolutely the case. First off, it's easier to learn as a software. So I very rarely hear people say, yeah, I've had ProPresenter for 6 weeks and I just can't even figure out how to put lyrics in. That doesn't happen. Usually someone will show them kind of the basics, and from there on they'll just play with it, and then they'll learn all this stuff. And it's not unusual to show the basics to a volunteer and then plan on coming back to show them the more advanced stuff, and they've already figured it out. I've heard that over and over again with churches. Secondly, I think that the tools themselves are designed in such a way where it adds the polish for you. So sometimes in a church you arrive, you're there half an hour early, an hour, 2 hours, whatever, for your individual church, and you get your presentation done just as the church service starts. Something happened, even though you had plenty of time, whatever the task is, it always gets bigger to fill the time allotted. So you get it done just as the church service starts, and there's a list of several things you would like to add, but you just haven't gotten to those yet. I think with ProPresenter, the advantage is that a lot of those things are baked in. So it's not the case that you get 80% done, and most people don't notice that last 20%. It does some of that for you.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, well, awesome. If you don't mind, I'd like us to kind of switch over from talking just about ProPresenter to thinking about making church presentations in general. Paul is sort of a guru at this, and a large part of what I think you do is helping churches and individuals excel at that. And so what I want us to begin with, first of all, why in the world should, let's say there's a person listening to this or watching it, and they don't do any kind of visual presentation whatsoever. Give me your bullet point list of why a person should invest in both the hardware and software, as well as the time it takes to learn how to do it. And then fourth, it does add preparation time every single week to your sermon prep or your worship preparation time. Why should churches make this transition?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is really simple, and it goes back to learning theory. So if you know any educators, they'll back me up on this, that there are basically 3 types of learners. There's audio learners, people that learn from what they hear; visual learners, people that learn from what they see; and kinesthetic learners, those that learn from what they do. Traditionally, the church has been very good with the audio learner. Not so good with the visual learner, really bad with the kinesthetic learner, except some of the rituals that we do. Baptism is an experience, prayer is an experience, congregational singing. Those are experiences, but they're not as much. So I think that this adds the visual element in it. You really, though, get a lot of power when you combine the senses. So hearing something and seeing it means you're much more likely to remember it. I had a professor at seminary who said that he added in PowerPoint. This was back in 2000, so there weren't a lot of choices. But he added in PowerPoint, changed his lecture none, and everyone's grades went up. So he just thought, well, clearly it must be the case that when I add this extra thing in, it helps people remember the material. So I think that that's, in and of itself, the best reason to do it. I think it's also more engaging, that we're not trying to be entertaining for entertainment's sake, but there's something to having something that engages more of the senses and makes it easier to stay focused when it comes to worship. And I think that using a visual medium does that as well. So those are my top two reasons.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. This is an area that I spent an awful lot of time researching and studying about 11 years ago, and I'll recommend that you go over to kevinpurcell.org and click on writing, and you'll find my dissertation. Probably the best resource that you can ever read on the subject of doing church presentation. No, I'm kidding about that. That's false pride, not false humility in this case. But I did spend a lot of time, and that was the thing that I think I learned most, and that is the level of learning that comes from sensory imagery or sensory experiences. And the two that we use the most in church today is audio and visual, right? Because even churches that are using visual, they're using two, and so that's better. But those are actually the two least effective methods of learning. And in fact, smell is the most powerful. Touch, or taste rather, is the second most powerful, and then touch is the third most powerful. So isn't it interesting that Jesus, when he said, "Do this in remembrance of me," he gave us an experience that you can smell, taste, touch, hear, and see. I find that, theologically speaking, essentially what Jesus was saying as giving us the perfect example of how to teach people of the supreme, most important part of our faith, and that is the crucifixion of Jesus Christ for the sacrifice of sins. And he used all of it, all of the senses, in order to present it. And then you go back to the Old Testament. God wanted to teach Adam and Eve boundaries, and so what did he give them? He gave them essentially an object lesson in the part of the tree in the middle of the garden. And he gave them a chance to have an experience of taste in order to prove or reiterate the idea that, hey, this was a sin and you violated this experience. And so it's a memory that they have now as a result of that. And so God was a multimedia teacher in the form of the Old Testament and in the New Testament with Jesus Christ and the sacraments, as the higher church calls them. We as Baptists, me as a Baptist rather, I should say, call them the ordinances. But so I think you're right about that. Couple of thoughts. I think Antoine and Rick each had something they wanted to share.
Go ahead, Antoine. I'll go after you.
Okay. One of the observations I make, we've talked about before, I do a lot of sketch notes, and because I believe in the power of images, but I also believe in the power of drawing while listening, and it's something that we seem to teach our children to do during kids' church, children's church. You know, they have an exercise, they do a connect the dots, or they do a craft, that builds along with. Paul, how would you say that we kind of translate some of that kind of multi-experiential or multi-central experience into the service? Because, truth be told, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room in church for everybody to pull out some Elmer's glue and some colored paper, and for all of us to, build our altar so that we get the understanding of what God was trying to convey to Moses and the Israelites. So how would you say that we kind of begin to build that, multi-sensorial experience?
Well, Leonard Sweet, you might have read or seen some of his books in Christian bookstores. He talks about worship as being epic, experiential. What's the experience that we can build? And I'm blanking on the rest of the letters. But anyway, the idea is that church tends to be one of the big complaints of people that don't like contemporary church is they say, well, it's all entertainment. It's just about being entertained. I would say quite the opposite. I would say the traditional church is more designed for entertainment, because entertainment is not participatory. Entertainment is you come in, you sit, you receive, and then you leave. And I think that that's not exactly at all what God had in mind. I mean, look at how Jesus taught the disciples. They're doing life together as a group. He doesn't pull them into a classroom once a week, lecture them for an hour or two, and then send them on their way. So I think that we can absolutely add experiences. Let me give you some that I have been a part of. So at my church, we had a leadership retreat a few years ago where we were just thinking through the things that had gotten in our way of everything that God had for us. So we had a page in our note journal, and the pastor suggested that we write down the things that we didn't want to give to God, but we knew we should, and then take that piece of paper and the campground, so there was a campfire. When the time was right, throw that into the campfire. So when you felt that you were ready, throw that into the campfire. So that's an experience that I still remember. This was probably 6 or 7 years ago. There was a church I heard of that had a kind of a booth set up in the back where they had created kind of a modern confessional. So this wasn't a Roman Catholic church, but James does say, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you can be healed. So what they'd done was they had a computer set up where you could type up things that you confess to, and there was a delay, so you wouldn't go, oh, well, I have a problem with sexual stuff, and there's someone from the opposite sex that has that same problem. We need to get together so that we can have that problem together, or some other bad stuff. So there was a delay, so you couldn't tell who had what sin, but you could confess it kind of in public, but with some anonymity. So that's another way to do it. I think that one thing that we've done during our altar calls at my church, especially during the big services, Christmas and Easter, things like that, is we've had crosses up on the front of the church with nails in them, and then we've had pieces of paper where you could, if you wanted to give your life to Christ, you could write your name and that date, walk up and put your piece of paper on the cross. So just as Paul said I'm blanking on the book, that God canceled the record of sin against us by nailing it to Christ's cross. See how beautiful that imagery is? And we just read right past it. Don't think, oh, we could totally do that in church. You don't have to actually nail a nail. You could just have a nail and you stick a piece of paper through it, and in effect that has the same imagery, and the person is doing that themselves. And so that everyone is going up there, the pastor actually had 2 different colors of paper, and they were all in the bulletin, and you put the date you gave your life to Christ in the past, if that was the past, on one color, and your name and today's date if you were choosing today. and that was after he prayed with them and everything like that. But so look for ways that you can add experiences, you can add participation into what's going on, and I think that it'll be much more feature rich. Our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters have incense that they use that is symbolic of the Holy Spirit, and we in the Protestant Church try and distance ourselves from the Roman Catholics, but it could be that that's a really good idea, that just because they do it doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Smell great.
That's one of the things that I wanted to mention. You talk about the sensory integration, and I'm Baptist, so I think I can critique Baptist. I've been Baptist all my life, but my concern is always in our worship services that we are too passive. There is the part where we're singing along, and we can try to do things like take notes during a sermon, but it's still, my concern is sometimes that we create an environment of entertainment more than interactive worship. And my wife and I visited an Orthodox service back in April, which, like a Catholic service, immediately when you walk in, your senses are immediately drawn to, like, the incense. You smell the incense that's already there in the sanctuary, and there's icons on the wall. Of course, they're so traditional. They're not going to use anything like presentation software, but our worship software. But they have icons on the wall, and the whole service is interactive. The liturgy is mostly sung, and then of course it culminates with the Eucharist, which we did not take part in because they don't allow anyone who's not part of the Orthodox Church to do that. But we observed it and thought it was very beautiful. But I think about things like this for my own tradition in the Baptist Church. And this past weekend, Kathy and I were in New Orleans, and I saw a billboard for the World War II Museum that said that it had a video presentation narrated by Tom Hanks that was in 4D. And my understanding of 4D is like, that's where, I didn't see it. We didn't go to the museum, but I can just imagine, they're showing the storming the banks of Iwo Jima, that they sprinkle water on you, or you smell things, or you have these sensations. Because I've been to some things like that, like at Niagara Falls, for instance, where you see a video and they throw water on you to demonstrate some points. But some of those kinds of things, I think if we took them into the church, it would be almost gimmicky. So Paul, you're kind of the expert on this. Where do you draw the line between, say, the sensory experience being too gimmicky, but keeping it worshipful beyond entertainment at the same time?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was muted. I think that there is a line, and you try not to cross it, but you want to be engaging. So I was just thinking about, let's say you're doing a week on heaven, and as Christians, heaven is our actual home. So there's a metaphor there. Remember, Jesus talked in metaphors. We have basically transliterated the Greek word for metaphor, which is parabolos. Sorry, my Greek pronunciator isn't working very well. Which is para, alongside, balo, thrown, something that's thrown alongside, metaphor. So Jesus talked in metaphors, and we use his same metaphors even though we're not in an agricultural community. So I was thinking, what is a great metaphor for home? Maybe not everyone has had this experience. I know that my mother didn't bake fresh bread, but there still is something about the smell of fresh baked bread, or cookies, fresh baked cookies. So what if on a week talking about heaven, you very subtly had the smell going, maybe in just off from the front, you had several toaster ovens with Pillsbury cookie dough baking these cookies throughout the morning, and then fans kind of blowing the aroma out. A lot of people would probably be distracted, but the pastor could bring home that heaven is our home, that it's going to feel more like home than any place we've ever been before. That, and just the smell of cookies is the smell of home for so many people. And so I think that something like that might be appropriate. But
letting the cookies burn would be crossing that line, perhaps, for the invitation.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think that you can go too far. I think you can be gimmicky, but I think what is his name? There's John Acuff. Is the author of a blog called Stuff Christians Like, and he's kind of funny. And he has something he calls the Jesus juke. And in the church, you've all experienced this. Someone will be saying something that is in no way related to the Lord, and someone else will bring in Christ into it. Man, I feel so much better after going to the bathroom. Did you wash your hands like Jesus washed our sins away? Well, yes, I did, but it was a throwaway comment. I didn't want to get into something theological. I think that sometimes church can do that, though. I think sometimes we can stretch too far. We can take a perfectly good idea, and it's not, wow, that's cool, I didn't think of how those related. It's more like, ooh, they're really trying hard to make that fit, aren't they? I think that they're really trying hard to make that fit is where you've crossed the line.
Yeah.
And there's no hard and fast rules. It's just how can you integrate this all and help people learn, help people experience, help people interact with the Holy Spirit, learn more about Christ without going, ooh, that was not good. Kind of like a bad joke. Not good.
Yeah, I think that what you're talking about there is when you cross the line from being interesting to trite or interesting to uncomfortable, those kinds of things. And just like you, things escape me the minute I try to think about it. But there's a couple of guys who talk a lot about making worship art. Maybe that strikes a thought in your mind, Paul, and you can tell me who I'm trying to think of. And that's one of the issues that we have in church today is back in the 1600s and 1500s and the 1700s, the best art in European Western culture, if you wanted to go find it, the two places you found it was in the mansion of the king and in the church. Today, when you watch American Idol, what is one of the negative comments that the judges will say? Well, you're a good church singer, but you're not good enough for this. And it's sad. It ought to be the opposite. It ought to be that you're good enough for singing on the radio, but you're not good enough for church. I don't literally mean that, but what I'm saying is, I think to answer Rick your question, if it's truly art, if it is, this is the best that I can do, and it glorifies God all by itself, then it's beautiful, and therefore it can be considered artistic. Then I think that it's appropriate. If it, because art is anything from photography to visual to writing to music, all of those things are artistic in nature. And I think of art, I think God created art, and all art should reflect the glory of God. And if it's not reflecting the glory of God, it's not art. And that might be a snobbish Christian view of it, but that's just what I personally believe. And so I think when you're getting at using something in worship, if it is not reflecting by itself, reflecting the glory of God, than that. And then the other thing I would say about this, Paul, see if you can agree with me, and I'll get back to you in just a second, Rick, and that is too much is often of the problem when we go overboard with it. Like if you're using an object lesson for every single point of your 4-point sermon instead of maybe once every couple of weeks or every month or so, that kind of thing. Rick, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I was going to make the point, one thing I've learned that there's a distinction between, doing something giving glory to God and perfectionism, because if I'm not careful, I will, I'll work on my slides too long, or I'll do things like this, trying to be perfectionistic. And I'll give you a real good distinction here between the two. When we used to belong to a church where anyone participating in the worship, singing or playing instruments or whatever, had to be almost professional level before they would ever let them out on. It was a literal stage before they'd ever let them out on stage. And when we first visited the church where we are attending now, they had two middle school age girls come out and play instruments. One had a flute or something like that, and the other had a violin or something. And I don't remember now, but they were playing Closer Walk with Thee or something like that. But anyway, as they were playing, they hit some wrong notes. It was not a perfect concert level performance, but I found it extremely moving. But I thought to myself, what a wonderful experience for them, as the ones doing this, and for us, very moving. But they would have never been allowed to do that at my former church, and I think that's where we, sometimes we can go overboard with artistic expression, thinking, well, it has to be perfect. I think God can receive glory just when we give our best, and our best is not always going to be perfect in the eyes of the world, but I think God looks at that quite differently.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have a saying that I say anytime I drift towards perfectionism, and that's, if Jesus wanted it perfect, he would do it himself. Because as it turns out, we can't. We can't do a perfect job. We can only do our best. Now, there's also another aspect to it, that sometimes you work on the last 8% of something, and like one other person in a congregation of several thousand may notice that. That's closer to perfection. If you're spending an extra 5 hours tweaking all the apostrophes in your presentation so that they're the right kind of apostrophe.
I admit that I do that.
Yeah, that verges towards perfectionism. But making sure that the words are spelled right, I think, is not. So there's, I think there's a line, doing the best that you can with what you have. I think that's excellence. I try not to say, well, that's good enough for church. I don't want to err on that side, but I don't want to err on the other side of saying, well, if I don't get any sleep tonight, I can make this good enough for church. I think that's probably the same thing.
I think those are great points, and what I want to ask you now, Paul, is in the short time that we have left, give us 2 or 3 things that a church can do, or people running multimedia, or people in charge of planning worship, or a pastor presenting a message or Bible study. What are your sort of top 2 or 3 things that they could do to just make it better, to make it more useful, higher quality, whatever? I'll let you decide how to go in that direction.
Yeah, I think the 2 things that most churches make a mistake on is time and team. That they throw together the worship service, the night before or an hour before or something like that. The pastor is famously known for finishing up his or her sermon notes, depending on your denomination, right before church starts. You're not going to get creativity in that amount of time. You're just not. The second thing that I think that people err on is we've got this myth in the Western world, and I think you touched on some of the myths that we believe. This myth is that there is a lone artist who is a genius that creates everything by himself in a manic session of creativity, and that's not true at all. It's absolutely the case that during the Renaissance there were schools of artists, and so Leonardo da Vinci would have a school, and Michelangelo would have a school, and they would all produce similar art because they all had the similar master that they were studying on. But just because there was a piece of art, it doesn't mean that every last little detail was created by the master. Could be that the master went away and say, okay, carve to here, and then I'll finish it up, so that he wasn't wasting all his time getting the leg out of the piece of marble. He was spending his time turning the cylinder into a leg. So that's part of the myth, and I think that if we really want to do creative work, we need to spend some time in community, working through what's coming up, and I think that it's a problem if the pastor thinks, oh, I'm the only one smart enough, good enough, etc., to come up with every last bit of the church service. That's a problem. That's a problem of humility that needs to be addressed. I think that it's a problem if you're not getting multiple perspectives, because things will speak differently to different people, and not everyone has the same perspective. So the idea that I can bring in a bunch of different people and we can all come up with different ideas, and everyone's going to look at the problem a slightly different way, and that slightly different way might touch someone in the service in a way that no one saw coming. So I think that those two things are absolutely essential.
All right. Either of you guys got a question?
I forgot mine, so it's all good.
Now, I think this is a growing area of interest in the church. Some of us assume that like everybody's doing it. My experience has been, however, that there are still a lot of churches that are making this transition, trying to become relevant. And my fear is that a lot of them think that the magic is in the equipment. You know, if I install this equipment, it'll just transform my church. And that's not at all the case. Some of what we've talked about today is the reason for that, because they don't yet know how to do it the right way. That's actually how I started on this journey of study and learning, and why I chose to use this as my doctoral dissertation topic, because I wasn't doing it the right way, and I was putting people off and offending and making people less interested in what we were doing. And so I think that's important. If you want to make this transition, don't just install a projector and a computer and think you're done. You need to do a lot of research and study. I think the pastor needs to be one of the first people, because I think preaching preparation should be done at a certain level that it affects how you prepare your sermon when you know it's going to be presented in a multi-sensory way. And so I think that should be part of your thought process as you're thinking about how am I going to illustrate these topics. One of the questions needs to be, I think, for every sermon is there some image, is there some illustration that that I can use that kind of brings all of this together, sort of bookends of it, and then can I present that in a way that's more than just me telling about it? Can I show it to them? Can I, like you mentioned, preaching about home, heaven is our home, what are the ideas that people have about home? Some of those things. And so I think you're right about that. And And so, Rick, you wanted to say something about that?
Well, I was just going to say, the other thing is, I think sometimes, and this goes back to my concerns, which are rooted in my own self. Sometimes you can lean toward perfectionism, and you can be too elaborate. I mean, I remember in the '90s when we first just started using PowerPoint in worship, and I was the one that was doing that because I had a laptop and had PowerPoint on it, and so I became the first person to do the slides at church. But when we first were doing that, I think I probably did every font, every transition. That's what most people did back then when you were first starting out. And you realize, or at least I realized at a certain point, that simple is often better than these things that we do that are so elaborate, and especially worship. To me, the best worship software, presentation software, these kinds of things are almost the kind that you don't notice, that draws the attention to the message. It's just like, if you're preaching a sermon, we don't want to draw attention to ourselves preaching the sermon. We want to draw attention to the message of Scripture and what God wants through that message communicated. And so those are always the things to keep in mind. And like I said, sometimes simple is better, regardless of how you're using these different tools.
Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct that if you look at the difference between a box of Microsoft Office software versus a box of Apple software, just take a look at the box and you'll see there's something elegant about the way Apple does design versus the way Microsoft does it. And I'm not bashing Microsoft in this. What I'm saying is they're both software, and one is elegant in its simplicity. And I think that sometimes churches think we need to, Antoine has an iPad mini box, and it's just a big white box with a photo of the side of the thing. So simple. That sometimes we think that it's all about this huge production, and sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you need a huge production. But sometimes stripping away the unnecessary will create something that people are just moved by because of its simplicity. And getting rid of the distractions is part of that. Making it as simple as you can and still powerful, that's something awesome. And by the way, I agree with you, Kevin, that it's the case that it's not the equipment, it's not that you have a projector, it's not that you have a live stream, it's not that you have a multi-million-dollar facility that makes you relevant. It's what the people in that do. So Jesus didn't have all this stuff, and he was extremely relevant. The gospel itself is relevant. It's just that sometimes years of tradition and religion make it seem less so because it gets dry and crusted up with this stuff that we've piled on top of it. We think that calling baptism makes it sound more holy than the actual word, which is the same word that Jesus talks about what the Pharisees do with their dishes, how they wash them. The baptizo, that's the Greek word for washing. Yet, for some reason, the church, instead of using the modern English word, we're using this old-fashioned word. And I don't get that. We want to make things extra special words, and we therefore make them inaccessible to people that need Christ. So I think that we've got a lot of work to do, and some of it is really simple stuff where we just strip away all the stuff that's been added over the last 2,000 years and just get back to the basics, and then we use these tools to make it easier for people to engage. live streaming, which is one of the things I do as well, is all about getting more people to hear the message. It's not about, oh look, we're a cool church, we've got live streaming. No, that's the wrong perspective. So I think that that's what we need to concentrate on, is what can the tool do, not, hey, we're a cool church that has the tool, because that's not the message. The message is the gospel, the good news. That's what it's called, good news. And if what your church is preaching is not good news, rethink why the early disciples called it the good news.
Getting back to your earlier recommendation of Leonard Sweet's issue of the epic concept, this is from his book Postmodern Pilgrims, and he talked about the parts of epic, and they come from, let's see if I can find the comment here, it was down here, experiential, participatory, image-driven, and connected. And I think we've talked a lot about all of those ideas today. The experiential, meaning let people have an experience. Again, the Lord's Supper is the perfect example of that. Participatory, that's something that someone does instead of just sitting back passively listening. Image-driven, I don't think he's necessarily just talking about pictures on a wall, but images. That's visual images in the mind. And then connected is, people interacting with one another. And that's probably the worst thing that we do in church. I hear preachers will stop and say, James McDonald's is one of these. He'll have some catchy word that he'll use, and he'll say, everybody say connected, connected. And that's, he thinks he's making it connected and participatory. That's not enough. And we don't do that well because we're all sitting passively in a congregation. And of course, I'm in a church that's just like that. Whereas I remember when I used to be a youth minister, what did we do? We had them up playing, and we had teachable games, and you can be involved in that, and people remember it better. We used to play the thing called the salvation game, where you had to teach someone a Bible verse, and that Bible verse was symbolic of the salvation experience. Once they could quote that Bible verse, that was the symbol of them being saved, and then they had to go teach it to someone else, and vice versa. If you really care about that, just search for the Salvation Bible Memory Game on the internet, and you'll find it. But Paul, these have all been really great points and tips, and if you want to learn more from Paul, tell them where they can find more of this kind of thing from you.
Yeah, so you can find pretty much everything I do at trinitydigitalmedia.com, and you can watch my shows as they premiere Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. That's during the summer -4 UTC, during the winter -5 UTC at churchtechcast.com. And what I do is I am all about using media to impact lives and eternities, and I think that every church in the world can do that, whether their media is something just as simple as making a painting or drawing something, all the way up to environmental projection and 4D interactions and everything in between.
All right, cool. Thank you very much for being with us today, and we really enjoyed it. I think this is a good conversation, and always we appreciate when guests come on. And Paul, we're glad you're here, and of course we'll love to have you back sometime in the rotation of some of our regular guests. We do have some others that we've got planned coming up. I don't have any definites to confirm with you and announce at this point. I do want to mention just one thing. I posted over at my personal website, kevinpurcell.org, a new post about eSword, which eSword X, a new version for Mac. I don't know if you're familiar with eSword. Did any of you ever use eSword back in the day?
No.
All right, 2 no's and 1 yes. Well, eSword X is a pretty nice program that is free, except on Mac it's $10, but that's nearly free, and you can get a lot of great content. And so I posted about it. Here's the actual program itself running, and on our YouTube channel I've got a demo of it. So I hope you'll check that out and share it. We put that conversation, the great conversation we had last week, is up now. You can see that. Go to all of these at kevinpurcell.org or theotek.com. That's where the podcast's homepage is, theotek.com, and you can get access to all of our podcasts through your Trinity, through Stitcher Radio, iTunes. Those are the audio ways to get it, and then, of course, my YouTube channel for the video. And we record this every Friday morning at 9 a.m. and then make it available a little bit after that. Usually by the middle of the afternoon, it's up on YouTube to watch later on. That's the way most people enjoy our podcast, is watching it either on YouTube or listening to it through audio. Please share this. Please let people know about it. If you have any questions or comments for us, let us know. You can do it through Twitter. It's probably the easiest way to get me, K.A. Purcell. That's how you can find me on Twitter, or just go over to my website and find links to how to reach me in other social media ways, or just plain old-fashioned email. And we are thankful that you listened. Thanks for being a part of the Theotek podcast this week. Thanks, Antoine and Paul and Rick, for being here.
Sure thing. I like your shirt, Kevin.
Hey, all right. There we go. Number 2. We're number 2. No, actually, we're number 4, I think. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.